Are you aware of the #1 misconception that homebuyers have when purchasing a home in 2024? And no, I'm not talking about the typical misconception that you need 20% down payment. Hint, you actually don't. Usually 3 to 5% is plenty. Today, I'm actually talking about when purchasing a home, buyers believe that when the Fed reduces their interest rates, which they just did, mortgage rates also dropped. You might be surprised to learn that when the Feds did reduce those rates this week, mortgage rates actually went up. So what the heck is going on? Why is this happening? We're going to cover all that and more on today's episode. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing you need to know, and the main reason why we didn't see mortgage rates go down when the Fed cut their rates, is the Fed rates are going to be short-term rates, whereas mortgage rates are considered long-term rates. So they're not directly impacting each other. So on the Fed side, typically when they cut rates, that's going to impact things like credit cards, car loans, personal loans, things that are going to be a much shorter time frame, whereas the long-term rates don't really see that big of an impact when the Feds reduce their rates. However, that doesn't mean that the Fed reducing the rate didn't actually impact the mortgage rates in some way. However, you have to think of it in the long term. So typically, over the last couple of months, we've been pretty much expecting the Feds to start reducing the rate sometime by the end of the year. So for the mortgage rate industry, these rate cuts have already been baked into the prices, which is why we've seen interest rates heading in a downward direction over the last 6 months. In the beginning of summer, we were at 7.5%, and right now we're hovering about 6.1, 6.2%, significantly lower, making homes a lot more affordable than they used to be just a couple months ago. And yes, the Feds are expected to continue reducing rates probably twice before the end of the year. Again, a lot of that is already baked into the mortgage rate, so you're not going to see a dramatic impact when the Fed decides to do so, unless they cut rates significantly more than what the market is expecting. So knowing that information, you might be thinking to yourself now, well, how do I understand where mortgage rates are going? Are they actually going to continue going down as we head through the rest of the year going into 2025? Well, there's a couple key indicators that you're going to want to watch a lot more closely to have a better idea of where mortgage rates are going to be headed in the future. And the three things that I typically watch the most are going to be what the 10-year Treasury is doing, what unemployment numbers are doing, and what inflation is doing. So let's go ahead and go over all three of those now. So let's go ahead and start with the 10-year Treasury. So I'm going to pop a chart right up here, and this is basically going to show you that what the 10-year Treasury does, mortgage rates typically follow. You can see up and down, these pretty much are going to be interlocked throughout the last 30 plus years. And so if you watch what the 10-year Treasury is doing, it's going to give you a very good indication of what interest rates are going to do. And over the last 6 months, the 10-year Treasury has been going down. So that's why we saw interest rates also head in that direction. Now, if you want to get a good indication of what interest rates might be doing in the future based on the 10-year Treasury, the other thing that not a lot of people talk about and not a lot of people are looking at is the average spread between the 10-year Treasury and that 30-year fixed mortgage rate. So typically, over the last 30 years or so, that spread has been about 1.7%. So let's say, for instance, the 10-year Treasury is at 3%. Typically, you are going to have interest rates right around 4.7%. Now, the reason that's important is ever since COVID, that spread has been all out of whack. Over the last year, it's starting to finally get a little bit better, but we're still at a much more significant spread than we usually are because there is a lot more uncertainty about the economy and the US in general, and because of that, we have that spread much wider than it usually is. So right now, the 10-year Treasury is hovering somewhere around 3.7%. So if you take that average spread, we should have interest rates somewhere around the 5.4% right now, and again, they're hovering around 6.1 or 6.2%. So if we get some more certainty in the economy, the risks of recessions continue to fade away, that spread is going to get more narrow and more narrow, giving us a much better indication that we should see interest rates continue going down in the near as well as long-term future as that spread gets a little bit better over the next couple months and even year or two. Now, the next thing we want to look at is inflation. So obviously everybody knows that inflation was out of control during COVID. However, over the last couple months, we're getting reports that inflation is just a little bit over what they're trying to get it to, which is 2%, which is why we're starting to see the Feds start to reduce their rates right now. So every time we get a positive inflation report, typically you're going to see interest rates drop over that next week. And if we get an inflation report better than what most people expect, those are the opportunities to see interest rates take a little bit larger of a dive all at once when it outperforms what the market is thinking for inflation. And then on the opposite side of things, unemployment. So unemployment numbers are extremely important to look at as well when you're trying to figure out where mortgage interest rates are going, because the higher unemployment is, the higher the risk of recessions are, and if there's a recession, typically the Fed's going to have to cut those interest rates faster, which over the long run is going to reduce mortgage interest rates as well. So if we get unemployment numbers that go higher than expected, that actually counterintuitively starts to drop interest rates as well. So if you get a month where inflation is low and you have unemployment going up, those are the conditions that are typically going to be best suited to see interest rates continue to go down. So although it's impossible to predict where interest rates are going to go in the future, I think we've all seen that over the last 4 years, these are some of the indicators that you can use to get a much better idea using data to figure out where things might be headed. So when those unemployment numbers come out typically once a month, as well as when the inflation numbers come out typically once a month, those are the opportunities where you're going to see the most amount of movement in the market. Again, if those numbers come back significantly different than what the general market expected. And then again, over the long run, as long as the US economy gets more and more predictable, you're going to have that spread between the 10-year treasury and the 30-year fixed mortgage continue to shrink. And again, that will eventually start reducing interest rates even more than where they are right now. So trying to figure out exactly where they're going to go, again, almost impossible, but there's definitely a very good case to be made that over the next year or maybe even two, we could see interest rates in the low 5s again, possibly even the high 4s, but it's just very hard to say and predict exactly what's going to happen with the general economy really more than a month or two in advance. So my advice for buyers is it's not something you should be trying to predict and really try to time the market to get the lowest interest rate. You should be looking at what you can afford now. Can you purchase a property in the neighborhood that you want to be in? Can you afford those payments? And can you see yourself living there for 5 or more years? If the answer is yes to that, and you're thinking about entering the market, then now is still a great time to enter the market. The problem with waiting until interest rates get to that low point is that every time interest rates do drop, you're going to have a lot more buyers enter the market as well, which is going to make things more competitive. Which is why I said in my last Orange County housing market update, which I'll put a link to right up here if you're watching it on YouTube, expect the housing market to most likely heat up as we head through the remainder of the year if interest rates continue to drop, which might sound odd because typically once you get into the holiday season, the winter months, that usually is the slowest time in real estate. However, if we see interest rates drop and more people are not putting their homes on the market, which typically they're not going to be doing towards the end of the year, you're going to see more buyers, less sellers, which is going to lead to a market that is more competitive than it is right now. And although we don't have weeks of data to back this up yet, we can start to see this trend emerge. So over the last week, we saw demand shoot up by about 5%, where inventory remained the same, which is making the market hotter today than it was just a week ago. And again, typically it's usually cooling down this time of year. So this is an indication that we could start seeing a trend where the market starts heating back up if interest rates continue to go down. Now, if you have been thinking of purchasing a home and you want to make sure your offer is as strong as possible in 2024, you can check out this video right here if you're watching on YouTube, where I go over the top tips that you need to write a competitive offer in today's market so that way you can get it accepted and into your new home. And if you haven't already watched the video on how commission has changed, especially for the buyer side of things for real estate agents, I highly recommend that you check out this video right here, where I'm going to go over everything you need to know about how the commission has changed and what you need to know and how to navigate it as a buyer. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye, everybody.